Welcome back to WD.
FM, the official Walt Disney Family Museum podcast. We're your hosts, Brie Bertolacini, Content and Research Manager.
And Chris Mullen, Marketing and Editorial Specialist at the Walt Disney Family Museum.
Welcome back, Chris. It's so glad to be back doing our deep dive episodes. Today, we're going to be talking about our package feature films. And so going through a handful of those films that were created after World War II. Now, to take us back to what we covered in our last deep dive episode, we talked about Walt and El Grupo's Goodwill Tour to South America and the films that resulted from their efforts, Saludos Amigos and The Three Caballeros. Now, these films comprised of segments that were too short to be considered feature length, but a little too long to be considered a short, such as the mold of Mickey Mouse or Silly Symphony cartoons. So today we are packaging up an episode featuring Disney's later films of the 1940s, categorized as package features that followed the same structure. So Make Mine Music, Fun and Fancy Free, Melody Time, and The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad, released in consecutive years from 1946 to 1949.
First, let's start off with the situation the Walt Disney Studios found themselves in at the end of World War II. Roy O. Disney said, quote, "After the war was over, we were like a bear coming out of hibernation. We were skinny and gaunt. We had no fat on our bones. Those were lost years for us," end quote. For 4 years, the Disney Studios devoted over 90% of its wartime output to producing training, propaganda, entertainment, and public service films, publicity and print campaigns, and over 1,200 insignias donated to military units and services. Walt Disney pledged his support to the war effort without hesitation and at cost, meaning without profit. The Walt Disney Studios was depleted, both financially and creatively. Many of Walt's artists had been deployed in the war, and not all came back to work. Walt faced the challenge of rebuilding his staff and getting them excited for their next feature. Let's hear from Walt talking to journalist Pete Martin about this period of time.
And after the war, there was quite a problem picking up the pieces.
I'd like to know a little bit about that problem. You mean finding the men and getting charted again? Or?
Well, getting the men back. Now, a lot of the men got in
I had you run out of dough.
Yeah, well, we didn't have any money because we'd been producing nothing. Now, and our markets had been closed to us. And not until the markets around the world began to open up where we could get our pictures that we made in the 40, 41, 42, like Pinocchio and some of those that never received proper distribution around the world, until we could get them circulating. We didn't have much income. And I hadn't made too many short subjects. I'd been writing during that war period on inventory that I had prepared, and everything in the So it was quite a problem. It kind of seemed like a hopeless thing to begin to pick up again. I tried these package things where I put 5 or 6 things together to make an 80-minute subject, because I had a lot of ideas I thought would be good done in the cartoon form if I could go 15 minutes with it, or if I could extend it to 20 minutes in length. So I made several packages of things, but I had a lot of stories I wanted to do, and I just couldn't do them in 7 or 8 minutes. And if I did them 15 minutes, I couldn't sell them. There was just no in-between market, so I was trying to find another way to wrap up our talents.
Walt wrote for the company's annual report released on December 31st, 1945, quote, "A reconversion job consists of reorganizing our staff to include the experienced men whom we lost and who have now returned, of training others to provide for increased production, and to build up our inventory of stories in preparation and of pictures and work. I believe it can be done quickly and efficiently in proportion to the enthusiasm and the teamwork we can apply to it. All these qualities mean good pictures, and good pictures mean that our future is assured. We have a clear road ahead. Let's get on our way," end quote. Get on their way they did, but not without some difficulty. So prior to the war, Pinocchio, Fantasia, Dumbo, and Bambi were unable to be distributed by the key European markets. So now that the war was over, the films could be distributed to those markets, but due to the war, these countries whose economies were still recovering would just not allow exportation of the box office revenue. So this left the Disney studios with mounting debt stateside important funds frozen overseas, and the company's future is just kind of up in the air. Roy managed relations with Bank of America and conveyed the bank's concerns to Walt. So let's hear from Walt about one of the bigger disagreements the Disney brothers had.
So I wanted to get back into the feature field, but it was a matter of investment and time. Now, to take and do a good cartoon feature takes a lot of time and a lot of money. But I wanted to get back. And my brother and I had quite a disagreement. My brother, I don't know what it was, what was going through his mind then and everything. But I think he was confused and everything. He worries about the finances and things. And I said, by hook or crook, we've got to get going. We've got to get back in the business that we were in before the war. I had 3 pictures I wanted to do. I said, I want to do these pictures, and I want to do them in this order, and I have to be able to make decisions. I said, I can't run this plant without having to make without being able to make decisions. I said, I have to plan not a year ahead, but 2 years ahead. I have to take care of these artists and overlap between productions. I have to keep the whole thing going. So it was one of those things. What are we going to do? But he was confused, and not being in production, he didn't know what would come. Now, that's why I wanted to diversify. I wanted it set up so that all my eggs were not in, say, that cartoon basket. In other words, when I went up to bat, you see, I had to hit a home run, you see. I didn't have enough chance for an average. I wanted enough different types of things that I could do with my organization that I could fall on my nose with one of these pictures, but I had another one right behind it that would hit. So we finally got together, which we've always done, and we decided to go ahead.
Walt was ready to embark on the studio's first post-war cartoon feature. The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad, Alice in Wonderland, and Peter Pan had already been in story development before the war. Walt pitched Alice in Wonderland and Peter Pan specifically to Roy. However, Pinocchio had been a recent adaptation of a famous story and had not been the box office sensation that Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was. Roy insisted the company could not undertake a lengthy, multi-million-dollar production. He also believed that neither Peter Pan nor Alice in Wonderland had sufficient public appeal at the time. The 2 brothers quarreled that evening, and after both sleeping on it, they came back together the next day and made amends. A compromise was made. Walt postponed the start of his first post-war cartoon feature film, agreeing the studios couldn't afford a costly project that would take 3 or 4 years to complete. Walt decided that making a series of short cartoons combined into a feature film would be the answer. Thus, package features were devised. For the first package feature, he focused on musical themes. When Walt developed Fantasia, he had always intended to update the format, effectively creating a roadmap for limitless follow-up iterations. This idea was abandoned due to the commercial failure of the initial film. This time, Walt would use more contemporary music to appeal to audiences. First package feature was Make Mine Music in 1946.
As opposed to the classical musical pieces selected for Fantasia, Walt instead opted for more popular pieces for Make Mine Music, with stories based on folklore, fantasy, and even poems, including The Martins and the Coys and Casey at the Bat. Popular singers and entertainers included Dinah Shore, Benny Goodman, Jerry Colonna, Nelson Eddy, and the Andrews Sisters were among the billed musical acts. One notable exception was the contemporary classical piece Peter and the Wolf by Sergei Prokofiev. The Russian composer offered the composition to Disney during a visit to the studio, declaring, quote, "I've composed this with the hope that I would get to see you and that you would make a cartoon with my music," end quote. So here's Walt talking with journalist Pete Martin and his daughter Diane about the Peter and the Wolf segment of the film.
I tried to package things, one of them I called Make Mine Melody, where I had music and things like that, and I had Peter and the Wolf that I did that, by the way, that Prokofiev wrote for me to do.
I didn't know that.
Yes.
I thought that was probably an old classic.
No.
Really?
No.
Did he write this for you, Walt? God, I didn't know that.
Well,
He
with
wrote
my
it.
daddy and
He
mine,
came. Yes. He came to America and he brought over to see me, and he said, I composed this with the hope that I could get to see you and that you would make a cartoon with my music. And he played it for me on the piano. And he couldn't speak English, but the man that brought him over interpreted. The man did the narration in between and everything. This was before it was ever performed. Then his friend Kusavitsky in Boston performed it. Then when it came around when I did this music, then I went to Kusavitsky. I couldn't buy it from the Russian government or from Prokofiev. Prokofiev, they had him back in Russia. But I bought it from, I didn't have to buy it, I could have used it. But I made a deal with Kusavitsky, paid him for the use of the score, and he put the money here for Prokofiev if he ever got back to America. But he never got back.
Make Mine Music consisted of 10 shorts packaged together. The segments included The Martins and the Coys, about two feuding families, sung by Kingsmen, a Los Angeles quartet led by Ken Darby. Blue Bayou, originally created for Fantasia, about a crane who lands in the bayou, sung by the Ken Darby Chorus. Benny Goodman and his orchestra playing All the Cats Join In, for a story of teens dancing at a malt shop. Without You, in which Andy Russell sings Ballad in Blue as an animated love letter reveals the lyrics to the song. Casey at the Bat, with Jerry Colonna reciting the sad story of the mighty baseball player Casey who strikes out. Two Silhouettes, depicting a ballet performance and sung by popular vocalist Dinah Shore. Peter and the Wolf, a children's symphony narrated by popular Disney voice actor Sterling Holloway, as orchestral instruments portray the story of a young boy who sets out to capture a wolf. After You've Gone, a musical fantasy with instruments as characters enacting the music by the Benny Goodman Quartet. Johnny Fedora and Alice Bluebonnet, depicting the romance between two hats, sung in glorious harmony by the Andrews Sisters. And finally, The Whale Who Wanted to Sing at the Met, where actor and baritone singer Nelson Eddy provides all the voices for the story about an operatic whale. Newsweek reported on April 22nd, 1946, Make Mine Music is done with as much simplicity as the basic idea will allow, with emphasis on the freshness of the ideas and the essential quality of the production, which are Disney's long suits. It is entertainment, pure and simple.
Following Make Mine Music, Fun and Fancy Free debuted the following year. This package feature consisted of only two cartoon segments, Bongo and Mickey and the Beanstalk. So a nice little break from all of those shorts that, Chris, thank you for listing and describing, to now just only two together. So in this one, Jiminy Cricket makes a special appearance in this film, introducing Bongo the bear with a song by Dinah Shore, reoccurring character here in the package features. And the story depicts a circus bear who meets and falls in love with a bear named Lulubelle. After the short ends, Jiminy attends a live-action party given by ventriloquist Edgar Bergen and his famed puppet character Charlie McCarthy and Mortimer Snurd to celebrate young Disney actress Luana Patton, star of Song of the South and So Dear to My Heart. To entertain Luana, Bergen tells the story of Mickey and the Beanstalk. This story, featuring Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, Goofy, and introducing Willie the Giant, marked Mickey's first appearance on the big screen in nearly 7 years. So Walt had planned on spotlighting Mickey in his own feature-length epic, and Mickey and the Beanstalk was the perfect story to feature Mickey as a hero against the larger-than-life foe. As early as September 1938, Walt held a story conference brainstorming a Mickey and the Beanstalk story. But due to World War II, this story was shelved. Walt had begun recording the voice of Mickey for the short before the war, but when the film resumed production, Walt realized he was just too busy and complained that his voice was getting too hoarse to continue voicing Mickey. He called upon his sound expert at the studio, Jimmy McDonald, to complete the recording of Mickey's dialogue. The finished segment included performances by both Walt and McDonald. Now, this wouldn't be the last time Walt would voice Mickey. He stepped back into the mouse's shoes again for the original run of the Mickey Mouse Club television series that aired from 1955 to 1959.
Quote, "It's time to swing along to a happy land of song. It's melody time," end quote. In 1948, Melody Time was released, featuring 7 musical segments. This included Once Upon a Wintertime, a winter romance with human and bunny couples sleighing and skating to a song sung by Frances Langford; Bumble Boogie, a fantasy sequence of a bee's nightmare played by Freddie Martin and his orchestra; Johnny Appleseed, where actor Dennis Day narrates the story of the real-life pioneer John Chapman, who planted apple orchards as he traversed the western frontier from Pennsylvania to Illinois; Little Toot, sung by the Andrews Sisters, based on the classic children's book by Hardy Gramatke about an irrepressible young tugboat who would rather play than work and causes trouble for all the other tugboats; Trees, an animated interpretation of Joyce Kilmer's poem; Blame It on the Samba, a hybrid live-action and animated segment featuring Jose Carioca teaching Donald Duck the samba and interacting with Ethel Smith on the organ; then finally Pecos Bill, narrated and sung by Roy Rogers and the Sons of the Pioneers, telling the legend of Pecos Bill to young actors Luana Patton and Bobby Driscoll. This segment also included Roy Rogers and the Sons of the Pioneers performing Blue Shadows on the Trail. Pecos Bill ended up having a life of its own in the Disney parks. The song Pecos Bill has been performed thousands of times over the past few decades in Disneyland's Golden Horseshoe Revue and Walt Disney World's Diamond Horseshoe Revue shows. Comedian Wally Bogue performed as Pecos Bill in a record-breaking 40,000 shows. Betty Taylor performed alongside Bogue as Slewfoot Sue, the spunky leader of a Western troupe. Pecos Bill Tall Tale Inn and Cafe is also currently a quick-service restaurant in the Magic Kingdom's Frontierland at Walt Disney World Resort. Many of the segments in Melody Time were later re-released as separate featurettes for television shows. Once Upon a Wintertime was presented as a mouse cartoon on Mickey Mouse Club. Walt featured Johnny Appleseed and Bongo with new recordings of the songs and narrated by Jiminy Cricket on his Disneyland television anthology show. And Pecos Bill was honored with its own dedicated episode. The segment Trees was issued to schools as an educational release celebrating interpretations of poetry with music and animation. Segments of Mickey and the Beanstalk were also presented in 1963 on Walt Disney's Wonderful World of Color, with a new introduction and commentary by Ludwig von Drake.
Now, the last of the package features The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad debuted in 1949. The film begins in a library, which is apt considering the 2 segments are retellings of classic books. The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame is the first book pulled from the library, and actor Basil Rathbone narrates the tale of Mr. Toad, Squire of Toad Hall, whose love at first sight with a motor car sends him into a mania that leads to the loss of the deed to Toad Hall. His friends Rat, Mole, and McBadger try to help him get out of trouble and redeem his good name by recovering the deed to the estate, proving he was framed. Now, for the next segment, singer Bing Crosby narrates The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, based on the classic tale by Washington Irving. The new school teacher, Ichabod Crane, arrives in Sleepy Hollow and is the talk of the town amongst the ladies, except for Katrina Von Tassel. Ichabod has his eyes on the Van Tassel fortune and attempts to woo Katrina. Brom Bones, who is also trying to court Katrina, tries to scare Ichabod away by telling him the tale of the Headless Horseman. On Halloween evening, Ichabod encounters the Headless Horseman and is never seen again. I love that I get I keep getting the package feature with only 2 shorts, and you get the ones with all of the many, many shorts. So sorry, Chris.
No worries.
Well, the legacy of this package feature has endured and continues today. So Mr. Toad's Wild Ride was an opening day attraction. Yes, go your favorite. It was an opening day attraction in both Disneyland and Magic Kingdom at Walt Disney World, and to this day it remains a fixture in Disneyland's Fantasyland. During the domestic Disney Park seasonal Halloween events, the Headless Horseman can be found in statue form at the end of Buena Vista Street and Disney California Adventure Park, and his frightening ride kicks off Magic Kingdom's Mickey's Boo to You Halloween party at Mickey's Not So Scary Halloween party at Walt Disney World, weather permitting, which is always, I remember when I used to go see the Boo to You parade, I was always like, are we going to get the Headless Horseman this time? And I remember the one time I did get to go, it was, of course, pouring rain. Well, The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad was the last of the package features in the 1940s. To economize expenses on the film, animation cycles were reused from previous films, such as The Old Mill. Katrina was closely patterned from Grace Martin from the segment The Martins and the Coys from Make Mine Music, and also served as a proto-Cinderella for the studio artists to study. The package features, while not as financially successful as Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs or Dumbo, were foundational to the security of the Disney studios during a challenging rebuilding period following World War II. So many of the segments created for the 4 package feature films would later be reissued and packaged again with different productions and television shows. Here's Walt explaining the package features legacy.
I did one called Willie the Operatic Whale, where
I saw that.
that was about 15 minutes. It was a story.
Well, I saw that in conjunction with one of your nature films.
Well, that was later on, we pulled them out of the packages and released them as individual things. But I tried this packaging, hoping that would give me some latitude in the stories I could do between the feature and the shorter subject. Well, they were they were not really a big success. They did return the money, but you can't exist on something just returning its costs. You see.
Now it is time for our aptly named segment, Fun and Fancy Facts. In an unprecedented move, Jiminy Cricket returned to the screen with Cliff Edwards reprising the Cricket's voice for Fun and Fancy Free. Jiminy's opening song in the film, I'm a Happy-Go-Lucky Fellow, was originally written for him to sing in Pinocchio. The fun and fanciful song was cut but not forgotten and was a perfect fit in this film.
There were a couple of reoccurring talents featured in these 4 package features. Dinah Shore made her Disney film debut singing 2 silhouettes in Make Mine Music and returned to sing and narrate Bongo in Fun and Fancy Free. Luanna Patton, one of Disney's first child stars, is featured listening to the story of Mickey and the Beanstalk at a party thrown in her honor in Fun and Fancy Free. She was also featured alongside fellow child star Bobby Driscoll in Pecos Bill segment in Melody Time.
For fans of Walt Disney's Carousel of Progress, of which we are 2 of them, you can hear the instrumental section of 2 Silhouettes from Make Mine Music in the attraction just before Grandma changes the television channel in the 1950s scene of the attraction.
Edgar Bergen and his wooden characters Mortimer Snurd and Charlie McCarthy, a popular radio comedy act, were invited by Walt to add some movie marquee luster to Fun and Fancy Free. Bergen and McCarthy returned to star in Walt's first television production, 1 Hour in Wonderland, where also Walt's daughters also star in. A fun fact on top of a fun fact, Walt and Edgar Bergen share the unique honor of having the only 2 non-traditional Academy Awards in history. Walt was presented with an honorary Oscar for Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs that features 1 standard-size Oscar and 7 miniature ones. Bergen received an honorary wooden Oscar with an articulated mouth to commemorate his outstanding comedy creation of Charlie McCarthy.
Artist and Disney legend Mary Blair styled many of the segments in Make Mine Music, Melody Time, and The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad. She specifically contributed concept art for Once Upon a Wintertime, Johnny Appleseed, and The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. John Canemaker, curator of the museum's special exhibition Magic Color Flair, The Art of Mary Blair, noted in the exhibition catalog, quote, whether they be mundane, seasonal changes, or high drama, Blair comes through, as Joe Grant remarked, with inspiring and inspired suggestions for staging, color, and performance.
And for our last fun and fancy fact, in celebration of Johnny Appleseed, Walt Disney narrator Dennis Day and Ethel Speed, the great-great-great-grandniece of John Chapman, aka Johnny Appleseed, planted a tree at the Burbank studio lot. And with that fun and fancy fact, that was a great episode featuring our package feature podcast episode. Thank you for tuning in to WD-FM, the official Walt Disney Family Museum podcast. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on all social channels at WDF Museum for all the latest updates.
Remember, good things come in small packages, and keep moving forward. Bye.
Bye.